what, in your opinion, because we've kind of gone over a lot of the talking points, I guess, the US propaganda talking points against China, what do you think is the most important thing that we should be focusing on?
Yeah, so in my view, I would say the most important thing to focus on right now is to break the cycle of dehumanization and the creation of an enemy, the propaganda that is making war and the build up to war possible. So everything else, the economic coercion, the militarization, it all flows from that basic problem, which is the US's ability to convince people that some lives are worth less than others, that militarization is peace, that endless conflict is somehow normal, that we need to go to war in the name of security. If we can expose and reject that mindset, then we can begin to dismantle the system that sustains it. When we look at what's happening, the US hybrid war against China, the genocide in Gaza, really the common thread is dehumanization through propaganda. The US government and the corporate media have perfected the art of turning entire nations into caricatures. So China is a threat. All Palestinians are terrorists. Even normal people who now stand up against genocide are being called terrorists. It's hysterical and it's absurd. And these labels erase the humanity of millions of people and they allow policies of domination to seem morally justified. So the most urgent task for us, especially for the peace movement, is really to help people see the faces behind the headlines and try to rebuild the empathy and understanding and try to make it harder for governments to sell war based on fear. But practically speaking, I think there's a lot of things that connect into that. So, first, we have international solidarity. So, the US government isolates people to convince us China, Cuba, Iran, Palestine, these are enemies. But these countries, these people are not our enemies. They're the victims of the same imperial system that exploits workers and resources everywhere, even in the US itself. So, by building these relationships through exchanges and grassroots connections, we can begin to see each other as partners in the struggle for peace. So, when Codepink, when members travel to China, when Codepink volunteers travel to China, when they stand with Palestinians, when they speak out against sanctions, they're doing what's this kind of radical thing within the empire, which is refusing to be divided by the propaganda. We also just have to challenge militarism at its root, the war economy. Every new enemy that we invent serves a purpose to justify this bigger and bigger Pentagon budget and more bases and more weapons and more contracts for these weapons companies. And the fear mongering, it's about money and power, and the military industrial complex needs that to survive, especially in our struggling economy. That's why even as US citizens struggle to pay rent or to afford healthcare, we see these crazy skyrocketing defense budgets. And that's very obvious right now. So, yeah, we can't talk about peace unless we talk about how the profits of war. And also, and maybe most importantly, we really need to transform our own political imagination. So, the US media keeps us very trapped in this false binary that the only two options in the world are US domination or global chaos, right? But there's another path, which is multipolarity, which could be an even better path, because that could be a world where no single nation controls everything and where cooperation is the mainstream rather than coercion. And I do believe that China's rise, despite all the fear mongering, is actually a glimpse of that possibility, and it represents a hope for a world where nations trade and build and address climate change, these important issues together instead of competing, constantly competing for supremacy. So, for activists and all of us in the US, for educators in the US, we're just trying to help people unlearn that sort of zero-sum Cold War thinking, refusing to accept the language of great power competition and peace through strength that they've been pushing a lot, and reminding our communities that the real conflicts are not between nations, but between all these systems that are rooted in the material reality. And when we frame the struggle in those terms, people began to see that standing with China or Palestine or any other nation under US pressure, it's not about taking sides in this geopolitical rivalry, but it's about taking the side of humanity itself. And the truth is, we're living in a moment of enormous danger, but also enormous possibility. The empire is lashing out because control is slipping and new alliances are forming across Asia and Africa and Latin America that are starting to prioritize mutual respect and development rather than coercion and destruction. So I think if we focus on that connection, we can be part of that global shift toward greater peace and cooperation globally.